The hall was enormous. It was so large that the lights near the ceiling looked like distant stars. The walls were made of a dark stone that no human had ever seen before, and the air smelled like something burnt and something sweet at the same time. Hundreds of alien beings sat in curved rows that rose up like the inside of a bowl. Some had 4 arms. Some had no arms at all. Some floated above their seats in small bubbles of gas. Some had eyes on the sides of their heads and looked in every direction at once. In the middle of it all, at a small and plain table on the lowest level, sat one human. Her name was Ambassador Dara Osei. She was 43 years old. She wore a gray suit that had been ironed that morning by a machine on their ship. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her. She was not shaking. She had decided before she walked in that she would not shake. This was the Galactic Conclave, the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy. 212 species, 3 spiral arms, thousands of years of shared history, and old wars, and older treaties. And today, they were deciding whether humanity would be allowed to join. The vote had been going on for 3 hours. Dara already knew how most of it was going to go. Her team had done their research. They had read every public record, every broadcast, every open diplomatic file they could find. Most species saw humanity as a curiosity, a young species from a small wet rock near the edge of one arm of the galaxy. They had only been in space for 200 years. They had only just discovered faster-than-light travel. They had arrived at this hall in a single ship, a generation ship. They had spent 60 years building, and they had knocked on the door with nothing but a letter of introduction and a request. Many species found this funny. Some found it sad. A few found it annoying. Only one found it admirable. The Veilthari were not a powerful species. They lived in the oceans of a planet called Seluan, far out in a part of the galaxy called the Outer Reach, where the stars were spread thin and trade routes were few. They were small beings, shaped a little like a cross between a jellyfish and a deer, and they glowed. Not brightly, not all the time, but their skin held light the way a lantern holds a flame quietly, steadily, like something warm, waiting to be seen. They had 12 seats in the conclave, out of over 2,000. They were not a species that people paid much attention to. When the vote for humanity's admission came to them, the lead Veilthari ambassador, an old being named Selvura, turned 2 of her 4 eyes toward Dara's table. Dara did not know why. She was not even sure the being was looking at her specifically. But she met those eyes anyway. She held the look steady. She did not smile or wave or do anything embarrassing. She just looked back, calm and level, the way her father had taught her to look at anyone who was deciding something about you. Selvura turned back to the voting panel. She pressed the approval mark. It was the only approval mark in that entire section of the chamber. The final count came up on the great screen above the hall. Humanity had received enough votes to pass the minimum threshold for provisional membership. By 4 votes. 4 out of 2012. A sound went through the hall. Not applause. Something like a collective murmur, the sound of 200 species, deciding that this was not very important and moving on to the next item on the schedule. Dara wrote the number 4 on a small piece of paper she kept in her jacket pocket. She wrote it with a pen her mother had given her. Then she folded the paper and put it back. Her assistant, a young man named Theo, leaned over to her. "We made it," he whispered. "We made it," she agreed quietly. After the session ended, there was a short social period in one of the side halls. Beings drifted in groups, talking in their own languages. Translation devices buzzed around most of them like small insects, turning words into other words. Food and drink had been set out on long tables, though most of it was not made for humans. Dara found a water dispenser and stood near it, watching the room. Selvura floated toward her. The Veilthari moved by pushing water through a small membrane on their back, even in open air, and the motion was quiet and graceful. She stopped a few feet away. Her glow was a pale blue. She said something in the Veilthari language. The translation device near Dara's ear buzzed and converted it. "You came with one ship," Selvura said. "Yes," Dara said. "One ship and a letter." "That is correct." Selvura was quiet for a moment. Her glow shifted, very briefly, to a soft gold. "My people were admitted to this conclave 900 years ago," she said. "We also came with one ship. They made us wait 6 years before they voted. They approved us by 11 votes. Dara did not say anything. She felt the weight of what was being offered to her. The quiet, careful way. One small thing was being compared to another small thing. She understood it. She was the kind of person who understood things like that. "I will remember that," Dara said. "And I will remember what you did today." Selvura's glow turned gold again, a little stronger this time, and she dipped her head in the way Dara had read was a Velthari gesture of acknowledgement. Then she moved away through the crowd, slow and quiet, her light fading back to blue. Theo appeared at Dara's side again. "What did she say?" "She told us we are not alone," Dara said. They left the hall and walked back through the long corridors toward the docking bay. Around them, other species passed without looking. A large group of Kreth-tall, gray-skinned beings in military-cut clothes walked by without moving aside, and Dara and Theo had to step to the wall to let them pass. One of the Kreth glanced down at them the way a person glances at a small animal on the road, not with hostility, just with the absolute absence of concern. Dara watched them go. On the ship, before she slept, she opened the log she kept and made an entry. She wrote down the names of every species that had voted for humanity. She wrote down the names of every species that had voted against. She wrote down the number of votes. She wrote down Selvura's name, her species, her planet, the color of her glow, and what she had said by the water dispenser. Then she wrote, at the bottom of the entry, in plain letters, "We are new here. We are small here. That is fine. We will not always be small. And we will not forget who saw us when we were." She closed the log. She turned off the light. She slept. 300 years later, the galaxy would understand what that log had meant. The meeting had been going on for 4 hours and 40 minutes, and nothing was being decided. That was not unusual for the Galactic Conclave. The Conclave was very good at meeting. It was considerably less good at acting. 212 species meant 212 different opinions, 212 different interests, and on most days, 212 different reasons to do nothing. Today, they were discussing Seluan. The Velthari homeworld had been under pressure for nearly 2 years. The Kreth Dominion, a powerful, expanding empire that had spent the last century slowly absorbing smaller systems along the outer reach, had moved a fleet to the edge of Velthari space. They had not attacked. Not yet. They had sent a document instead. A very polite document full of very firm language, explaining that the Velthari would benefit greatly from becoming a territory of the Dominion, and that they had 30 days to agree. That had been 28 days ago. The Velthari representative to the conclave was a young being named Orivel. She was the granddaughter of Selvura, who had died 80 years ago at a very old age by Velthari reckoning. Orivel did not glow the same deep gold as her grandmother. Her light was younger, brighter, more anxious. Right now, sitting at the Velthari table, she glowed a pale, trembling white. She had spoken 3 times in the session. She had explained the fleet positions. She had read out the Kreth document. She had described what would happen to Velthari culture, Velthari sovereignty, and the Velthari people if the Dominion absorbed them. She had asked, clearly and simply, for the conclave to act. She was running out of things to say. She was not running out of fear. Across the hall, the Kreth ambassador, a large male named Drav Kos, sat with his hands folded and his expression flat. He was not worried. The Kreth were rarely worried in these halls. They had 60 seats in the conclave. They had trade agreements with 40 species. When they spoke, the room leaned forward. When the Velthari spoke, the room checked its translation devices to make sure they were working. The vote came at the end of the 4th hour. Military intervention in defense of Velthari sovereignty. 409 in favor. 881 against. The rest abstained. The hall moved on. The next item on the agenda was a trade dispute between 2 species in the second arm. Orivel sat very still at her table. Her glow went out. Not dimmed out. The Velthari did that sometimes. when the feeling was too large to hold in light. A Terran observer named Lieutenant Commander Hana Yip was sitting in the gallery section reserved for military staff. She had been there the whole session. She was a compact, dark-haired woman with reading glasses she didn't actually need. She wore them because they helped her think. She had been taking notes on a small handheld device through the entire meeting. When the vote result appeared on the screen, she stopped writing. She looked at the number for a moment. Then she put her device in her pocket, stood up, and walked out of the gallery. She went directly to the nearest secure communication terminal and sent a message. The message was short. It said, "Conclave vote failed. Selûne is unprotected. 26 hours remain on the Creth deadline. Awaiting orders, but recommend we proceed with Protocol 7. The reply came back in 11 minutes. It said, "Protocol 7 approved. Proceed. Godspeed." Hana read it once, closed the terminal, and began making calls. Protocol 7 was not a new plan. It had been sitting in Terran military files for 6 years, updated every 8 months, adjusted as new intelligence came in. It had detailed fleet positioning, travel times, tactical options, and contingency scenarios. It had been written by people who had looked at the Veilthari situation and quietly, without telling anyone, had started preparing for the moment the Conclave did what the Conclave usually did. Nothing. 17 ships left Terran space 18 hours later. They did not file a public flight plan. They did not announce their destination. They jumped to FTL and crossed the distance to the outer reach in a little under 9 hours. When they dropped out of FTL in Veilthari orbital space, the Creth fleet was already there. It was a large fleet. 62 warships in standard Creth formation, a wide crescent, designed to maximize forward firepower and look as frightening as possible. It worked. The Veilthari government had been sending increasingly desperate messages for the last day and a half. They had 4 patrol vessels, old and lightly armed, and they had moved them in front of their planet the way a person puts their hands in front of their face before something hits them. Then the 17 Terran ships appeared. The Creth Admiral Fleet Commander Gathren, a decorated officer with 30 years of service and a wall full of commendations, stared at his display screen for a long moment. 17 ships. He had 62. He had seen Terran ships before. They were not impressive looking. They were not large. They were built in a way that Creth military engineers found slightly puzzling: too many angles, too much internal spacing, not enough visible weapon ports. Some of his officers thought they looked unfinished. He opened a channel. "Terran vessels," he said. "You are in the path of a legal administrative operation authorized under Creth Dominion expansion law. You have no jurisdiction here. I recommend you withdraw before this becomes a diplomatic incident." There was a pause. Then a voice came back. It was calm, unhurried, and quiet, in a way that made Gathren's secondary ears flatten against the side of his head without him choosing to do so. "Fleet Commander," the voice said. "My name is Admiral Yal Oduya, Terran Defense Force. I understand your position. I want to offer you some information before anything else happens." "Speak," said Gathren. "The Veilthari voted for humanity 300 years ago," said Oduya. "One vote. When most of the galaxy told us to go home, they said we could stay. We wrote that down. We still have the record. We have never forgotten it. And I want you to understand sincerely and clearly that we are here because of that one vote. Not orders, not strategy. That vote." Gathren looked at his officers. Several of them looked back at him. "That is a very old story," he said. "Yes," said Oduya. "We are patient people." There was silence on the channel for a moment. "You have 17 ships," said Gathren. "We do," said Oduya. "I have 62. "I know," said Oduya. "I have read every recorded engagement your fleet has been involved in for the last 40 years. I know your formation. I know your weapon systems. I know your fuel load based on the distance you traveled to get here. I know which of your ships have the older targeting arrays and which captains have the most hesitation between target acquisition and fire." A short pause. "I would like you to go home, Fleet Commander. I would very much prefer that. But I will not leave this system, and you will not touch Selûne. I want to give you the chance to make this easy." Gathren looked at the 17 ships on his screen. He did not like the quiet in her voice. He did not like that she had not threatened him. He especially did not like that she had mentioned his fuel load, because she was right, and he did not know how she knew that. He closed the channel. He turned to his first officer. "Get me everything we have on Terran combat history," he said. His first officer came back 6 minutes later looking uncomfortable. "Sir," he said, "we don't have much. They've been in 4 recorded conflicts in the last century. They won all 4. There are almost no tactical records. The other sides either didn't survive to report, or the engagements were over too fast for observation." Gathran looked at his screen again. 17 ships sat in perfect, still formation between him and Selouan. They had not moved. They had not powered their weapons to visible active status. They were just there, quiet as stones, waiting. He had a feeling he had not felt in 30 years of service, that he was being watched by something that had already decided how this was going to end. He did not like the feeling at all. The first shot was not fired by the humans. Gathran had spent 40 minutes looking at his screen and thinking. His officers had given him maps and numbers and old files. His second-in-command had told him that 17 ships against 62 was not a real contest. His fleet advisor had told him that the Terrans had no allies nearby, no support ships, and no logical reason to be confident. Everything they told him made sense. He still had that feeling. The quiet, crawling feeling that the 17 ships knew something his 62 did not. He decided the feeling was weakness. He had never let weakness make his decisions before. He was not going to start today. He opened a channel to his fleet. Forward formation. Move on the planet. If the Terran ships do not withdraw, disable them, and push through. He did not say destroy. He was not completely reckless. There would be political questions afterward, and he preferred to answer them without a mass casualty incident on the record. Disable was enough. 20 of his forward ships moved. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be studied in military academies on 14 different planets for the next 2 centuries. Admiral Yael Oduya had not waited for the ships to fire. The moment Gathran's fleet began to move, her tactical system registered the engine output change, and she gave a single word over her command channel. Go. The 17 Terran ships did not move forward. They moved sideways. All of them, in the same instant, sliding out of a straight-line formation into something that looked, on Gathran's screen, like his fleet display had suddenly developed a problem. The ships spread in 3 directions, low and high and wide, and before his targeting officers could recalibrate, they were already somewhere different than expected. The Kreth forward ships fired. They hit empty space. Oduya's ships did not fire back. Not with weapons. The first thing they did was release a wave of electromagnetic pulse drones, small, fast, nearly invisible on standard Kreth sensors. The drones had been in the hulls of the Terran ships the whole time, loaded and ready. They spread out between the Kreth forward vessels and the main fleet, and they detonated in a staggered chain that took 11 seconds from first to last. Gathran's forward 20 ships went dark. Not destroyed. Dark. Engines out. Weapons out. Lights out. 60% of their systems went offline simultaneously. The ships drifted, silent, like stones dropped into still water. His main fleet fired at the Terran ships. Some shots landed. 2 Terran ships took hits and fell back. 1 lost a weapon system. But the Terran ships moved constantly, not randomly, but in patterns that somehow always put them at the edge of a firing angle rather than in the center of it, as if they had calculated exactly where each Kreth gun would aim before the gun aimed there. Because they had. Oduya had spent 3 years, when she was still a junior officer, building a model of Kreth fleet behavior. She had fed it every recorded engagement, every formation report, every small piece of data she could find. She had run simulations until she could predict, within a narrow margin, what a standard Kreth commander would do, given specific conditions. She had then spent the years since refining it. Gathran, to his credit, was not a standard commander. He adapted faster than her model expected. He changed formation twice in the first 3 minutes, and the second change almost caught one of her ships. The crew of that ship, the times ESV, constant times, pulled a maneuver that should not have been physically possible at that speed, and the hit grazed their hull, instead of breaking it. When she reviewed the logs later, Oduya would find that the Times Constant, S pilot, had been awake for 31 hours at that point. The pilot's post-action note said only, "Did not feel like dying today." The second phase was targeted and precise. Oduya's ships began moving in pairs, isolating Kreth vessels one at a time on the edges of the formation. The Kreth ships were large and powerful, but built for frontal combat. Heavy armor on the forward face, lighter everywhere else. The Terran ships were small enough to move into angles the Kreth guns could not easily reach, and targeted engines, not crew compartments. One by one, ships on the outer edges of the Kreth formation lost propulsion. Gathren pulled his fleet back. He tried to condense his formation, to bring the remaining active ships together into a tight defensive group. But the Terran ships were faster in short movements, and they followed the gaps, pressing into any space that opened between Kreth vessels, firing disabling shots, and retreating before the return fire could track them. 37 minutes after the engagement began, Gathren had 14 functional ships left. Not destroyed, his crew casualties were low, and he was aware enough to be grateful for that, but disabled, drifting, powerless. He had 48 ships sitting dead in space around him. He had lost 2/3 of his fleet without a single vessel being permanently destroyed. The Terrans had done it with a kind of precise, exhausted, grinding efficiency that suggested they could have done it faster if they had wanted to. He opened the channel. "Admiral Oduya, Fleet Commander," she said. She did not sound victorious. She sounded tired. "I am requesting a halt in engagement." "Granted," she said. "Your remaining vessels are free to recover your disabled ships and leave this system. Your crews will receive any medical assistance they need from us before you go. We ask that you send a message to the Kreth Dominion government, informing them that Seluan is under Terran protection, and that any future approach to this system should come through diplomatic channels." "You could have destroyed us," Gathren said. He did not know why he said it. It came out before he could stop it. There was a pause on the channel. "Yes," Oduya said, "we could have." Gathren closed the channel. He sat in his command chair for a moment. Around him, his officers were very quiet. On Seluan, deep below the ocean surface, the entire Veilthari government had been watching through sensor relays since the engagement began. The Elder Council, 12 beings who had lived long enough to remember the days before the Kreth fleet had arrived, had watched without speaking. When Gathren's fleet began pulling back, and the 17 Terran ships held their positions around the planet like something settled and permanent, the council chamber filled with light. Every Veilthari in the room glowed at once, a deep, rich gold that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat, filling the dark water around them. The lead elder, an ancient being named Doru Asel who had known Selvura when she was young, turned toward the screen showing the Terran ships. He was 140 years old. He had never, in all that time, seen a favor returned. Not like this. Not across 300 years of silence and patience. He glowed gold for a long time without speaking. On her ship, Admiral Yael Oduya ate half of a ration bar, drank cold coffee, and began writing the after-action report. Her hands were steady. She wrote in plain, flat language, listing ship positions and engagement times and fuel expenditure. At the bottom of the report, in the section marked Times Additional Observations, she wrote one line, "Debt paid." Then she sent the report and told her crew to get some sleep. The recording of the battle reached the Galactic Conclave in under 6 hours. After that, things moved quickly. Not because the Conclave suddenly became efficient, it never did, but because 212 species all had the same reaction at the same time, and that reaction was fear, not of the Kreth. The Kreth were known, mapped, predictable. What they feared was something much harder to manage. The humans. Not because of the battle itself, though the battle was alarming enough. 17 ships against 62, with almost no casualties on either side, using tactics that nobody in the Conclave's military observer corps had seen before or could fully explain. That was unsettling on its own. What was more unsettling was the reason. 300 years ago, a minor species in a remote corner of the galaxy had cast one vote. One vote. In a session that most beings in the Conclave had forgotten the next morning. And 300 years later, another species had crossed hundreds of light years in warships, stood between a fleet and a planet, and taken 2 direct hits because of that one vote. That was not behavior anyone in the conclave had a model for. The messages to the Terran diplomatic offices began within 12 hours of the battle footage circulating. Some were formal official requests for meetings, worded carefully and politely. Some were less formal. A few were nearly frantic. The common thread in most of them was a version of the same question, dressed up in different languages and different levels of dignity. Are we all right? You and us, are we all right? Ambassador Tomas Reyes had been the lead Terran diplomat to the conclave for 11 years. He was a tall man with gray hair that he kept cut short, and a habit of pausing for exactly 3 seconds before answering any question, which his colleagues found either very wise or very irritating depending on how much patience they had. He read every message that came in. He read them with his morning tea, seated at his desk in the Terran embassy, and he made small marks beside some of them. Then he called a meeting with his team. We are going to respond to all of these, he said, but we are not going to respond the way they expect. His team exchanged looks. What do they expect? Asked his deputy, a young woman named Suri. They expect us to be pleased, he said. They expect us to be warm and gracious, and to reassure them that everything is fine, and we hold no hard feelings. They expect us to be grateful for the attention. That is what they think we want, to be acknowledged, to be accepted. And what do we actually want? Suri asked. Reyes set down his cup. To have an honest conversation. Possibly for the first time. The meeting started 2 days later. They were held in the Terran embassy rather than in conclave halls, which was the first signal that this was not a normal diplomatic exchange. Several ambassadors arrived expecting the usual format: long opening statements, refreshments, polite circles around the real subject. What they found instead was a room with a table, chairs, and a Terran diplomat with a very organized data system. The representative from the Duran Collective, a large, 4-armed species that had been in the conclave for 3,000 years and considered itself among the senior members, arrived with a prepared statement about partnership and shared values. Ambassador Reyes let him finish. Then he opened a folder. The Duran Collective voted against human admission to the conclave, Reyes said. 300 years ago. That is noted, and we do not hold it against you. We understand the politics of that time. He turned a page. In the following century, your trade delegation blocked a Terran application to join the Saran shipping corridor 3 separate times. We have the meeting records. He turned another page. In year 140 of our membership, a Terran research station in the second arm requested Duran navigational support after a drive failure. The request was declined. 8 Terran researchers spent 4 months on reduced supplies before a Valthari trade ship happened through the area and assisted them. He looked up. We have all of this documented. I want you to know that not as a threat, but as context. We would like to talk about the next 300 years, and we would like to do it with the full picture on the table. The Duran ambassador stared at him. He had never, in 40 years of diplomacy, been spoken to quite like this. Not rudely. Reyes had been perfectly calm through all of it, his voice even, his expression open. It was not an attack. It was something worse than an attack. It was a very thorough, very patient accounting. You've kept records, the ambassador said slowly. All of this time. We keep records of everything, Reyes said simply. We are human. It is what we do. The meeting with the Kreth Dominion's diplomatic envoy was different in tone, but similar in structure. The Kreth sent a senior diplomat named Veth Oren, a careful and intelligent being who came in with no prepared statement. She had clearly been briefed that the usual approach was not going to work. Reyes met her without the folders. He ordered tea, real tea, from Earth, a gesture that the Kreth envoy acknowledged with a small tilt of her head. I want to be honest with you, Veth Oren said. The Dominion did not expect this outcome. I know, Reyes said. We have studied your species for 2 centuries. We believed you were manageable. Many species have believed that, Reyes said. It is a reasonable conclusion from the outside. We are not large. We are not particularly aggressive. We tend to smile at people, even when we are angry. He picked up his cup. The part that is easy to miss is that we are also very old, in the ways that matter. We have been betraying each other and forgiving each other and remembering both for longer than most species in this conclave have had writing. We are very practiced at knowing the difference between a friend and someone who is simply nearby. Vethoran was quiet for a moment. What does the Terran government want from the Dominion? We want you to leave the outer reach systems alone, Reyes said. We want a formal treaty, not a gentleman's agreement. And we want the Veilthari compensated for the 2 years of economic disruption your fleet's presence caused. He set the cup down. In exchange, we will not pursue the matter further. We have no interest in punishing the Dominion. We have a very strong interest in a galaxy where smaller species are not absorbed because they are convenient. The address to the full conclave came at the end of the week. It had been requested by 38 member species, which was nearly unprecedented. The hall was more full than it had been in decades. Reyes stood at the central podium. He did not use notes. 300 years ago, we were 4 votes and a handshake, he said. You let us in because the minimum was met, not because you believed in us. We understood that. We were not angry. We were patient. He looked across the rows of beings, eyes, and sensors, and membranes, and clusters of antennae, all pointed at him. We have spent 3 centuries watching, learning, building, and recording. We have noted who helped us and who did not, who honored agreements, and who found reasons not to. We have been called naive, small, soft, and emotional. We have been told our attachment to old favors and old debts is a charming weakness. He paused for 3 seconds, in the way he always did. It is not a weakness. It is the most precise instrument we own, and we would like to use it now to build something better. Starting with a conversation about what this body is actually for, and whether it is doing that. The hall was very quiet. In the gallery, Arivel sat at the Veilthari section. She was glowing gold, not anxious white, not pale blue, but a full, steady, deep gold that she had not felt in herself since the day the Terran ships had appeared in Seluan's sky. She thought of her grandmother. She thought of a small table on the lowest level of this hall, and a human in a gray suit, with her hands folded, watching the vote. She thought, she knew. Even then, she knew. 30 years passed. The galaxy did not become a perfect place. It never does. There were still arguments in the conclave, still trade disputes, still old tensions between species that had too much history and too little patience. The Kreth Dominion did not become gentle or generous overnight. The species that had voted against humanity 300 years ago did not all suddenly transform into allies. But things were different. Quietly, steadily, in the way that real change almost always moves, not like a fire, but like water. Finding every crack and filling it slowly, things were different. Humanity had not conquered anyone. They had not claimed new territory, or built the kind of hard, obvious power that the conclave had always understood. What they had built was something harder to see and harder to dismantle. A web. A web of favors given, debts recorded, help extended, and help returned. Of small kindnesses that were never forgotten and never let slide. They had spent 30 years being aggressively, relentlessly, specifically loyal to the species that had been loyal to them, and increasingly, other species had started to notice that being close to humanity carried benefits that being far from humanity did not. Arivel had spent 20 of those 30 years as the Veilthari ambassador to the Galactic Conclave. She was older now. The anxious, pale white glow of her younger years had settled into something warmer, a steady amber that the Terran xenobiologists at Seluan University had spent a whole paper explaining as an expression of what they carefully described as settled purpose. She appreciated the paper. She had framed it. Her last official session as ambassador was on a standard conclave morning, a long agenda, 3 minor trade items, 1 infrastructure proposal for the second arm. Nothing dramatic. Arivel sat through all of it and voted where the Veilthari position required, and when the session ended, she stood, gathered her things, and walked out of the hall for the last time in her official capacity. There was a small reception after. Not a large one, she had requested small. A few dozen beings, mostly the diplomatic staff she had worked with for years, some Terran embassy members, 2 of the Elder Council sent from Seluan specifically for the occasion. Ambassador Tomas Reyes had retired 8 years ago. His deputy Suri had taken his place, and then a man named Dek had taken her place. And now the lead Terran ambassador was a woman named Isara Ponte, who was 34, and had grown up on a station in the Second Arm, and had been reading about the Battle of Seluan since she was 11 years old. She came to the reception and stood with Aurivel for a while near the window, both of them looking out at the vast curve of the station's outer hull and the stars beyond it. "I read your grandmother's file," Isara said. "The original conclave vote. We still have the record." "I know," Aurivel said. "Your people always have the record," Isara smiled. "It is how we show we were paying attention." Aurivel glowed amber. "My grandmother said something to your ambassador Osei that day, by the water table. She told her the Veilthari had also been admitted with barely enough votes. She told her she would not forget what she was feeling in that moment." Aurivel paused. "I do not think she knew then what she was starting. I do not think she knew it would become this." She gestured generally, at the room, at the station, at all of it. "I think she knew something," Isara said. "I think she recognized the same thing in Ambassador Osei, the kind of person who keeps promises without being asked." Far out in the outer reach, on the ocean floor of Seluan, the Terran research station had been operating for 22 years. It was a large facility, now 3 interconnected structures, sitting on a shelf of pale rock in water so deep that sunlight had never reached it in the planet's history. The Veilthari had built their own bioluminescent lighting into the external walls, as a gift when the station was commissioned. And on the outside, it glowed in slow, shifting patterns that the Terran researchers had eventually learned to read, the way a person learns the habits of a neighbor they live beside long enough. 2 of the researchers, a Terran named Cal and a Veilthari named Riensol, were working side by side at a deep current mapping station. They had been working together for 6 years. They had developed the particular kind of easy, wordless communication that comes from spending too many hours in the same room, staring at the same data. Cal would hand Riensol a stylus before being asked. Riensol would have the right screen pulled up before Cal turned to look for it. Riensol was young by Veilthari standards. She had been born 14 years after the Battle of Seluan. She had grown up on stories of it. Everyone in the outer reach had. But for her, it was history. The way old battles are history, to those who did not live them. What was not history was this room, this station, this long-running project that she and Cal had argued about and rebuilt and stayed up too late finishing together. "Do you ever think about it?" Cal asked once, not looking up from his screen. "Think about what?" "The battle. Your planet. The whole beginning of all this," Riensol considered. Her light shifted a thoughtful, slow cycle that moved from amber to pale green and back. "I think about the fact that it happened," she said. "But what I think about more is the part after. Your people could have taken something from it. Political credit. Military reputation. They could have made us grateful in a way that cost us something." She paused. "They did not do that. We just wanted to pay what we owed," Cal said. "That is the part," Riensol said, "that the rest of the galaxy has spent 30 years trying to understand." Admiral Yael Oduya was 71 years old and had been retired for 9 years. She lived on a coastal station in Terran space, in a small apartment that had a window facing the water. She spent her mornings reading and her afternoons teaching a remote course for young officers at the Terran Defense Academy. She was not famous in the way that some admirals became famous. She had never written a memoir, never done a major broadcast interview, never tried to explain herself in the way that public figures were expected to. The young officers asked her questions at the end of every course. They always asked the same things. How did you know 17 ships would be enough? What were you thinking when you opened the channel to Gathren? Were you scared? She always answered the last question first. Yes, she said. Every person on those ships was scared. Being scared is not the problem. The problem is when fear makes you forget what you came to do and why you came to do it. She paused. She looked at the faces on her screen. Young, attentive. Some of them barely 20 years old. You are going to go out into a galaxy that will often not see you clearly, she said. Species with more history and more power will look at you and decide what you are before you speak. That is fine. Let them decide. Your job is not to correct their opinion before the moment. Your job is to know your own record, what you owe, what you are owed, what you have promised, and to be the kind of person and the kind of officer who keeps those things straight. She leaned back in her chair. The galaxy does not need more power. It needs more people who mean what they say. That is the only thing, in my experience, that actually changes anything. She dismissed them and sat alone for a while, looking out at the water. Back in the conclave, in the same great hall with the same dark stone walls and the two distant lights in the ceiling, a new session had begun. New agenda items, new disputes, new proposals. The hall was as noisy and complicated and slow as it always was. A young Valthari diplomat had just been assigned her first posting to the conclave. Her name was Selu Ren. She was nervous in the way that only a first day could make a person nervous. Everything too large, too loud,